welcome to the channel. Here, I share Scareful stories. Stories to make you scared, make you think, make you wonder, and maybe, just maybe, make you a little more careful. If you like what you see, please give the video a like, leave a comment down below, and I'd love it if you subscribe to the channel. Every little bit helps get the video seen by more people. My kids are really getting sick of me telling them about small jumps in subscriber count and views, so let's get some big leaps in there so that their old mom can impress them. And now, the Scareful story of Hugues de la Plaza. San Francisco police seem to think he committed suicide, but literally everyone else says he was murdered. So let's get into the details. But first, there's a reason I never took French, and it's because my mouth literally can't make Frenchy sounds, but I think I've got Hugues' name down. This was a case I first heard about way back in 2010 on the show 48 Hours Mystery, and it's stuck in my head ever since, and it remains unsolved. Hugues was found stabbed to death in his locked apartment, and security cameras only capture him entering the apartment. What exactly happened that night? Hugues de la Plaza was 36 in June of 2007. A native of France, he had moved to the United States and even became an American citizen, while also holding dual French citizenship. At the time of his death, he was living in San Francisco and working as a sound engineer for Leapfrog. If you have kids, you are either smiling, thinking of your child's favorite Leapfrog toy, my 9-year-old still loves her little sleepy time puppy, or you're feeling a bit traumatized by the incessant songs or talking that some of those toys do. Either way, Hugues was doing well in his career and had just received a promotion. That promotion was cause for celebration, and so on the night of Friday, June 1st, Hugues went on a date with a woman he'd met on the internet and then met friends out afterwards. The group spent the evening at the underground SF club, enjoying some drinks and dancing. Hugues reported that the date hadn't gone that well, but maybe they would end up as friends. His friends say that he was in high spirits, laughing, smiling, hitting on women, and just having an all-around good time. They left the club around 2 a.m. the morning of Saturday, June 2nd. A friend made plans with Hugues to go motorcycling the next day, and as the evening started to wind down, the group dispersed and headed home. Hugues walked to his apartment about 3/4 of a mile away in the Hayes neighborhood of San Francisco. A surveillance camera shows him walking at 2:06 a.m. Although the picture isn't totally clear that it's Hugues, friends say it is him. He is alone in the picture. Once home, he spent some time on his laptop and also prepared a meal of rice and peas, eating a little bit of it before things went horribly wrong. The next morning, a neighbor stepped outside to get his paper. Remember when people still read papers? Well, he noticed blood on the shared porch in front of Hugues' door and called 911. The responding paramedics said that when they arrived, there was blood everywhere. I mean, everything in the house had blood on it. You could trace his footsteps through the apartment, like watch how he traveled, and you can see his bloody handprints as he's sliding down the wall. When the assistant medical examiner arrived, her first impression was that she was at the scene of a homicide. What else would you think walking in and seeing a body with visible stab wounds and blood everywhere? There was also some signs that a struggle had occurred. The TV had been knocked over, there was a broken wine glass, and Hugues' watch was found underneath him. But the more she looked at the scene, the more she began to question. The front door was deadbolted and the back door was locked. Although things like the overturned TV indicated a struggle may have occurred, there were things that pointed to there not having been a struggle between two people. The blood evidence did not show any high-velocity blood spatter and instead seemed to show someone moving slowly while bleeding. Hugues was not running from an attack or fighting with anyone inside of his apartment. Hugues' cell phone was found on the coffee table and had no bloody fingerprints on it, indicating he had ever picked it up or tried to call 911. Also on the coffee table was a notepad where Hugues had written two quotations: "Live as if you were to die tomorrow and learn as if you were to live forever." The blood on the front porch would seem to indicate that something happened to Hugues out there. It would make sense that someone might be attacked on their way home late at night, but we know Hugues made it into his apartment and was doing things for a short while before something happened. Perhaps he answered the door for someone and was attacked then. Detectives, however, pointed out that although there was blood on the porch, stairs, and railing, there was no blood trail away from the porch. The thinking goes that if someone stabbed Hugues on the porch, they too would have been bloodied by it and would have trailed some blood away to the sidewalk. Additionally, no one other than Hugues is seen by the surveillance cameras. Investigators chose to focus on the blood in the kitchen and thought that was likely where Hugues was stabbed. The lack of bloody footprints other than Hugues throughout the apartment checked a box in favor of the wounds being self-inflicted. But if Hugues stabbed himself in the kitchen, why did he then exit the apartment, leaving the bloodstains on the front porch, only to go back in and lock the deadbolt? Hugues' neighbors wives were interviewed, and one couple said that they heard noises in the early morning hours. They heard what they thought was the door opening and closing, a person running down the stairs, and also someone falling down. They didn't see anything or anyone, though, and also didn't find it suspicious enough to call 911. They recall also being asked about Hugues' lifestyle and state of mind. Did he do drugs? Did he hire prostitutes? Questions seemingly asked to try to figure out who would have had a reason to murder him. But then, they say they were also asked if Hugues seemed suicidal, a question they emphatically answered no to. From this telling, it appears as though the suicide theory was being advanced from the very beginning. The lead detective has a different recollection, however. According to him, the idea of suicide was only seriously considered after he interviewed Hugues' ex-girlfriend, Melissa Nix. Melissa describes Hugues as the love of her life. They dated for 4 years, and even after they broke up, they remained in contact and friendly with one another. She was on the East Coast when she found out Hugues was dead, and she immediately got on a plane to San Francisco to try and piece together what had happened. When she spoke to the lead detective, he recalls her talking about how Hugues was very into Japanese culture, and that after telling him that, she asked if Hugues had stabbed himself in the stomach and if it was harikiri. Speaking about the interview, the medical examiner who has listened to the tape of the interview has stated, the person that allegedly knew him the most said, literally, would not be surprised if the investigation concluded he had done this to himself. She literally says that. Nix denies being the one to bring up the possibility of suicide, saying the detective's questions were leading, and adding that Hugues was, if anything, too full of life. Back to the crime scene, there was no obvious murder weapon, but a few knives were taken from the kitchen and sent for testing. At the same time that was happening, an autopsy was performed. Hugues died from 3 stab wounds, one in his stomach, one in his chest, and one in his neck. The neck wound would have proved fatal within minutes. In addition to the stab wounds, there were also some smaller superficial wounds that would commonly be considered to be defensive wounds. These included an injury on his left forehead and a bruise on his right forearm. All of the blood, hair, and DNA evidence that was collected belonged to Hugues and did not prove the presence of another person. Eventually, the knives came back showing no traces of blood, but investigators did not let that deter them in perpetuating the idea that Hugues injured himself. They posited that after stabbing himself 3 times, he took the time to clean the knife of literally any trace of blood in an apartment that was covered in blood. And if that seems unbelievable, which yes, of course it's unbelievable, the other idea is that he hid the weapon. Again, after stabbing himself and having only minutes to live, he found the perfect hiding spot for the knife, as it has not ever been found. Perhaps he went outside real quick to hide it or throw it away, and well, isn't that a convenient way to explain the blood on the front stoop? Part of the suicide theory is that Hugues was high on drugs at the time he stabbed himself 3 times. Imagine the investigators' disappointment when toxicology reports came back showing that Hugues had alcohol in his system, which was to be expected as he'd just gotten home from a bar, but no drugs. In the end, the medical examiner listed Hugues' death as undetermined and said it was considered to be a suspicious death. Both Melissa and Hugues' parents refused to accept this finding, insisting Hugues had been murdered. Hugues' father hired a private investigator. The private investigator developed a theory that Hugues opened his door to someone that night, stepped out onto the porch, only to retreat back into his apartment, locking the deadbolt behind him in an attempt to get away from his attacker. But why would someone attack him? How would they even know he was home and that he would open the door after 2 a.m.? The private investigator heard theories that a jealous ex-girlfriend or boyfriend of a woman Hugues had been with may have committed the crime, but he could find no evidence of that. He also found no evidence of Hugues being suicidal. He had money in the bank, he had friends, he had plenty of girlfriends, he was living the life, he said. There was no suicide note and no reason for him to kill himself. The private investigator concluded that Hugues had been murdered. When the San Francisco police seemed reluctant to move forward with the serious murder investigation, Hugues' father went to French authorities asking them to investigate. Because Hugues was both the citizen of the United States and France, the French were allowed to investigate. The French police re-interviewed friends and neighbors and were allowed access to evidence which they retested. A bit of a bombshell followed when it was announced that they had found unknown DNA on Hugues' watch. The French investigators ultimately concluded that Hugues had been murdered. The medical examiner continued to point out that the manner of death is a matter of opinion, and so that while her opinion is that it's undetermined, others are free to hold the opinion that it was murder. The lead detective in the case admits that more could have been done early on in the investigation and that that the crime scene could have been more carefully examined and processed, while also insisting that the case has always been treated as a homicide investigation. In 2009, a new chief of police asked the Los Angeles Police Department to look at the case. It also came out that the San Francisco Police Department had asked for an independent review of the case, and that in February of 2009, they received a report from an independent medical examiner that stated the death of Mr. Hugues de la Plaza is a homicide. The report stated that blood was found outside on a wall adjacent to the staircase, which could have been cast-off blood from a knife being stabbed into Hugues and then coming back out. There was also another gem, that there was an abrasion on Hugues' right hand, which was not noted during the autopsy, but that would indicate Hugues tried to defend himself. As for the question of why wasn't he screaming out or calling 911, the examiner stated that the neck wound would have most likely rendered Hugues unable to do so, and his death would have happened quite quickly after the injury. There's also the issue of shock. The San Francisco medical examiner said she spoke to trauma surgeons who said people dying out will call for help, but there are other experts who state the exact opposite, that traumatic injury can put someone into shock. There is one murder case I remember where a man, Peter Porco, was attacked with an axe while he slept, and he got up in the morning and performed his normal routine. He used the restroom, loaded the dishwasher, went outside to get his paper, and even remembered where an extra house key was hidden when he found that he had locked himself out. Finally, his injuries overwhelmed him and he fell down, dying in his front hall. The scene made it clear that he had no idea he was injured, much less so injured that he should have been screaming for help and calling 911. Hugues' apartment makes me feel something similar happened. Not that he didn't necessarily realize he was injured, but perhaps he was not aware of just how injured he was. It looks to me as though he answered the door, was attacked, retreated back inside his apartment, and headed to the kitchen to find a towel or something else to help with the bleeding. Even if he wasn't in total shock, his first thought may have been to apply pressure to his wounds and then call 911, not realizing there was no time. So where are we nearly 15 years later? We're actually no closer to knowing who murdered Hugues, and that is a travesty. Hugues' family has offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, and I think it goes without saying that anyone who has information regarding this case should contact the San Francisco Police Department. Well, that's it for this one, guys. Let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe and share the video if you can. And until next time, stay safe and stay careful.